Okay, thank you so much for being here. Before I read some poems and talk a little bit, I wanted to, mention two things. One, I brought some books, and I won't profit at all from them. Should you choose to get one, anything above my cost will go back to the church, and they're in the back. And then second, and maybe more important, is the I guess a disclaimer. So this is my journey. It's only mine. It's not yours. There are connections we have with each other. And also want to say that I couldn't have done anything that I ever did for my parents without my two brothers and other close family friends. It takes a village, and some of those are mentioned within the collection, but any of their stories would have to come from their mouths. And we were very respectful in our family, of all the kinds of things that can go on. But my brothers are okay with what I've done, and I appreciate that so much. So the book itself is like a narrative. It starts with some context for who Audrey was, moves up through early days with dementia to her moved here to Abingdon, where my brothers brought her when she needed to be closer to me. And she was so independent, she wouldn't live anywhere except at home until she had to live somewhere else. And then it moves through her days in hospice, and it's not like tear jerking, although I do cry when I read some of it. And then to the processing that goes on after a death in the last section, because I believe and have always believed that our relationships with people evolve even after they're no longer here walking with us. And so I had some really interesting insights after Mama passed away to help understand a lot about who she was as a character, because if she was, as we all are, well, maybe all of us, not all of us, some of us, many of us, complicated, complex people with all kinds of sides. So I wanted to begin with a poem, which is the very last poem in the collection, which explains why I've spent so many years and so much time holding on to her story. And I guess I should say, many of the poems in here are in her voice. I created poems out of her letters, conversations, and stuff like that, oral histories from earlier days until when she was in Grace. And so there they are. But this last poem is based on something she told me once about college. So Mama was fortunate in that after her mother passed away when she was a teenager, that wasn't the fortunate part, that was the sad part, but her aunt took her under her wing and allowed her to spend a couple of years in college, and then later secretarial school when they thought that was better, but she loved college. And this is based on a test she took at Northwestern University, where she got to spend her second year. So, bedtime story. Once upon a time, my mother told me she took a history test. Relate everything you have learned in this course to the world situation today. It was 1942. I almost want to say that I would give anything for some professor to find her blue book behind an oak bookcase at the university where it could have fallen and lain for decades after Audrey McClary took a pen and wrote, long before a social worker came to her house and asked her what year it was, and she couldn't say. She never told me if she made an A or not, although she had to have. A, I think now, is for artifact. Underneath this story, there is another story determining its own destiny. Remembering 1942 is not always an option, but that doesn't mean it's gone. Everything from Auschwitz to Audrey is there in somebody's memory. We just need to remember to pass it on. So that I wrote, and so the poems are in chronological order, sort of in the book. They weren't written that way. A student asked me yesterday at Emory and Henry how long I'd worked on this book. I'd say, well, all my life, but some of the poems I wrote in my 30s, and I'm 66, almost 67. And when I was working with this publisher, one thing they wanted me to do was to bring in more context for who she was when I was a younger woman. And so I pulled out all the poems that I had said, I will never publish these poems, ever. 'Cause the poems you write about your mother when you're a young woman, and I revised some of those. And then I even went back to junior high, and so the epigraph for the book is a poem I wrote in junior high. So this next poem, to give you a sense of who she was as a young woman, is called Intimation Ode. One of the wonderful things about Mama, I have to say, is she met Daddy, fell in love, married 11 days later, and had 4 babies in 5 years. And I think probably the first year we might have lived in Daddy's room in a boarding house from pictures, I'm not sure, but then we ended up in a little concrete block house I have such fond memories of. Anyway, this poem will speak for itself. And now the English teacher in me is wanting to say, go read Wordsworth's Intimation Ode later today. I just love that poem. It's one of my favorite poems. So this is my homage to that, perhaps. So I was in a birth order. My first brother was John Henry. Then I came. Then my brother Charles. And then 2 years passed. And then our baby brother Graham. This is about John Henry. My brother fed me my bottle, lying next to me in his diaper, with me in mine, so young. We were so young, we did not need words other than eyes and sighs. But one day we talked. We talked in a language invented by angels and understood by only us and perhaps God, the God who stood over us the day our mother baptized us, herself, far outside the city limits, where our concrete house was as holy as the Vatican to our father, excommunicated for marrying our mother and having these children who talked like angels, while their daddy worked, and their mama, pregnant again, fed coal to a pot-bellied stove. What did we say to each other? I think we talked about that time before we were born, a time that hovered outside the window like a flying saucer only a few could believe in. But our parents did. They believed in flying saucers and babies and metaphysics and living on next to nothing, as if it was everything in the whole wide, holy world. So that's from a story, obviously. I do remember, John Henry being, and I'm not 100% sure we did talk like that. I have to be honest. Poets take poetic license. John Henry was precocious and spoke early. I was maybe precocious, but I didn't speak till I was almost 3, and my parents worried about that. And so years later, I started teaching linguistics and stuff. I thought, I bet we spoke. We had to have spoken. Maybe I was just too shy, because by the time I did speak, I was speaking, whole paragraphs. My first sentence was a question. So I must have jabbered with him. And I won't go into other reasons why I believe that is true. But we were just very intimately close, John Henry and I. So let me skip to another poem. Since I'm rattling on about John Henry, let me go in to the section where these won't be in chronological order, where I wrote poems. Well, no. About, I always come with I'm going to do this, and then when I read a poem, I think, no, I have to do this. So I'm going to read the talk. This is sort of about language, and it's in the section where, when I was working on this incarnation of the book, which went through so many drafts, I just went deep somewhere and decided I was going to try to get inside Mama's head when she was in hospice and she had lost language, as we know it. She had language as she knew it, and I kind of knew it anyway. But I was talking to Paul earlier about her hospice days. She probably might have died within a few days of when she, but she went on and on. She was the Energizer Bunny. And part of it was people thought she was afraid to go. She didn't want to leave me. I was sick. I was in cancer treatment. And she gave me lots of solace. And she also, I think, was afraid, in the way a 4-year-old might be afraid of, So somebody at knitting said, you need to have the talk. It might have been Rachel. Somebody said, you need to have the talk with her. So I started thinking, well, okay. So this is called the talk. And it starts with, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. Timothy 6:7. Everybody keeps having the talk with me. First Felicia, and then her friend Denise, as if I need prodding to cross over. My time will be my time when my time comes. I want to leave this earth or body alone, the way I came into it alone, the way we all do. And in a busy place like this house, that takes planning. A last meal will be nice, I think. Dessert, coffee, and an afternoon nap, no slipping away at night. Let me close my soul to rest my eyes while the sun is shining in the window on my face, so I can wake up to an unclouded day, no night in between the here and now, that eternal day like the one I buried my son. Denise described a heavenly shore. Felicia listed everybody I will meet as if anybody will be there to greet me. She knows me better than that. Still, starting with Kitty Boo, she named my cats, every cat I ever knew and loved, as if I might have forgotten all these cats, along with Money and my sisters and Daddy and John Henry and John and everybody else alleged to be there on the other side. Felicia knows I never believed in another side. It is certain we carry nothing out. We are all just here now, all of us, together, some alive, some dead, some visible, some invisible, everybody and every cat and my last kitty, my kitty, kitty, kitty. So I'm going to read a cheerful poem in a minute, but so this poem, is based on those talks. And also those cats and that reference in the very last lines, my kitty. One of the last things Mama said before she gave up South Carolina and planted herself here was my kitty. Because when we brought her here, she parted with her kitty. Okay, I said I'd read something with some. You could interrupt me at any time. Okay, let me. What's an upbeat? Oh, I'll give you an interlude, which is based on a letter, so you can hear her voice, her real voice, after my voice. This is called 1999, and it is a letter from a letter she wrote to a good friend of mine. Dear Gail, your flower, a beautiful pink azalea. It was a beautiful day in Beaufort National Cemetery, cool and blue skies. We had a bagpipe playing before and afterwards. He played Amazing Grace. John was one of 12 children, so lots of family, mine, so many dead. John ill so long. He had a lot wrong with him. We had 45 years after marrying, 11 days after we met. There is love at first sight. Sincerely, Audrey E. Mitchell. So I'm reading that to preface. Well, I haven't gotten to the humor yet, but it's here. So this is a poem. One of the things that was remarkable about my mother was in early days with her dementia, she was caregiver to my father who had Parkinson's disease, which, has its own complications. And so I was my father's medical power of attorney, and at the same time, I let Mama do her thing, and I just kind of hovered because she was his wife. And okay. And if I'd noticed anything untoward, I would and could step in. So the decision. Perhaps some people would question how I let my mother decide to let my father leave this world, to pull one feeding tube and not try another, the day she decided to let him go. I held his medical power of attorney, something offered years before when my mother said to my father, in words that would not make sense to me until after he had passed away, my mind is not what it used to be. Perhaps some would tell me I, not my mother, should have been at that table of doctors who listened to her when she said, I know death when I see it. I believed her when she told me, though, recounting how the decision was made in the face of my father's body shutting down. One doctor did not agree, she said. I could see it in the way he left the room. But the others in the meeting agreed it was time to let Mr. Mitchell go ahead and go. Perhaps some people would tell me even today I should have exercised my own right to choose, to delay the inevitable death of my father. But what difference would that have made? Mama was right, and as much as I had hovered, watching every move she made with my father, sometimes whispering behind her back, this was a decision she had to think she could make. And I guess, I'll say in terms of everything I've done and read about and thought about, I think offering dignity to people with dementia is like number one there on my list. It's just number one. And then we go from there. So I'll read a funny poem, and then I'll switch back. First date. This was one I was never going to publish, so there you are, full disclosure. One day, in my early 30s, I thought I'm just going to get it all out of my system, vent everything that annoys me about my mother, everything, as if it would stop when I was 32. It continues. So this is first date. Okay. The bell buzzed through the house like a cosmic alarm clock, waking me up from adolescence. I do remember that, but not what I wore, or how I fixed my hair that afternoon, or if my face was broken out in pimples. I only recall rounding the bend in the stairs after holding my breath for 30 seconds to calm myself to meet this boy's gaze, this boy who wanted to fall in love with me, and seeing instead my mother at the front door. At 54, she looked pretty good in a bathing suit. What's your sign? She asked my date as he walked into the house that afternoon, storing up her analysis to report on later when he told her he was a Scorpio. After more dates than I would count, my mother did my boyfriend's horoscope, summarizing, Bad pennies always turn up. Well, you had to be there. It was sort of funny. Mama was a real character. Fortunately, that boyfriend, became an integral part of our family. She didn't scare him away, which says a lot, and vice versa. So that was fun. Let's see. What did I mark? 47. So I told you I would talk about some poems about compassion. And so I talked about one of the important things is offering dignity, but then even I, can get frustrated and impatient. Believe it or not. It's true. So when Mama was in hospice, I was still, very deep and heavy into cancer treatment and all kinds of cancer treatment. And then I kept lots of journals, including while I'm sitting in chemo journal, and I have all these notes, I'd be sitting there and I'd get a call. But this, one day I had to leave chemo to meet her at the emergency room. And this is what came from that. So it's called Emergency Room. And it starts with the epigraph, "Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding." I do not think the doctor thinks I am intelligent. I sense it in the way he talks to me and pauses, as if I will not understand what he is saying. I think my comment about the CT scan classed me, made me seem as if I have not read it all, and more, as if studying Alzheimer's disease has not been my life, as if my mother's life has not been my life, as if I'm a total stranger to CT scans and brains. We make conversation about the episode, though, considering general observations and lab results, as he mentions all the tests he has performed. I interrupt him once to tell him I am missing chemo and wonder if I will die now that I am here, holding my mother's hand in case she dies, instead of driving across town for treatment. I can tell the doctor thinks I am worrying too much. He tells me I am not going to die. My mother is not going to die either, not today. Later, my mother will open her eyes and smile, beatific in her innocence, happy to know I am there, oblivious to the emergency room and all its trappings. Then the doctor will talk to her as if she understands, and I will realize that nothing is exactly as it seems, that we are always where we need to be. The doctor is not here for me, but my mother, exactly where he needs to be at this moment in time, explaining things clearly to me through my mother, as if he never did doubt my intelligence, as if I have the potential to understand. So I guess it's obvious there's that dignity, offering dignity. The doctors were so good with her. I write a column for, I'm going to read a triple poem and then we'll have a polyline. Anyway, there is a lot of humor in the book, I have to admit. For some reason, I'm just drawn to these today. But long story short, Cure Today, I write a blog about cancer and have for some years to sort of give back to the cancer community. And one of those is a tribute to the mammogram technicians who were there with me when I took Mama for her last mammogram of her life. And just how wonderful they were with her. I sent them a special card from Hallmark. There are all these things that we just don't think about that happen, when we're doing that sort of thing. And I don't go into it as great a detail in the book, but both Mom and I were diagnosed with cancer the same week. Her second cancer and my first. and maybe last, you never know. And but I do talk about that in one of the poems in the book called Bald Felicia. Because one of my brothers said, she needs to know you're sick, and she sees you in this scarf. So one day he just pulled it off, like she needed to see me bald. And it's true, she did. Let me read you a poem that just epitomizes what I love so much about Mama, and then I'll shut up and let you all talk a bit. No, actually, I'm not going to read that one. You all read it. It's a poem about how Mama mailed a letter. She was so old-fashioned. She'd get on the bus and go downtown to mail her letter, and I just love imagining her doing that. No, I'm going to read this about Guy, since you started off about Guy. That little boy that I brought to church, he was about that age when this poem is set. So one thing that happens when you have illnesses in the family, Guy grew up with two somewhat older parents with now and then health challenges, and then his grandparents, on his father's side, were even older than my parents, because his father was old. And I worried about that, but you can't. But they were loving grandparents through it all, infirmity and everything. And so this is about my little boy, Guy, who has turned into a total sweetie pie, and always was, and always will be. So it's called Round and Round. I took my toddler to Sims Park. One day I felt overwhelmed by a simple family visit. I wanted to leave South Carolina, our visit lasting too long, a blizzard blocking the road home. Sitting on the bench as my son played, I thought of my mother's cancer and chemotherapy treatments I would not understand until I went through my own. I thought of my father, his Parkinson's disease starting to show more signs. I thought of my mother, her dementia emergent even then. Both of my parents were overwhelmed, as much as I was overwhelmed, but they had each other, and they had their children. Now and then, my young son looked over, making sure I was still on the bench, his guardian there in an urban park where I too had once played. When he saw me burst into tears the day I felt overwhelmed, he ran over and took me by the hand to drag me onto the playground with his 2-year-old arms. Well, maybe I'll finish. I don't know if I can finish. With his 2-year-old arms, my son spun me on the merry-go-round until I was laughing again, like him. My life is open to wonder, as the road to Virginia was to melting snow.